A normal palace delivery run turned into a full-scale security emergency when Sergeant Alistair Rowan noticed a delivery van sitting in the wrong place with a seal that had already been broken. Instinct kicked in. What seemed like a minor paperwork irregularity quickly revealed something far more severe. This was supposed to be routine, the kind of morning that dissolved into muscle memory for men like Rowan, where the palace breathed in its own steady rhythm and every movement had a place, a purpose, a predictable reason. Yet there was a wrongness in the air that he could not name at first, only feel, like a chill pressing through stone. Something was very, very wrong. He approached the van slowly, reading details the way other men read faces. The engine heat, the manifest tucked too neatly, the rear latch sitting just slightly off as if someone had closed it in haste. And then he saw it. A torn ceremonial coat folded and concealed in the gloom behind stacked crates, stained with dirt, and something darker that made his stomach tighten. For a heartbeat, it did not make sense. Then the meaning landed all at once, heavy and horrifying. The coat belonged to Princess Charlotte, and if the coat was here, hidden like evidence, where was the child? What would you do in that moment, standing in the shadow of Buckingham Palace with your oath ringing in your ears and fear crawling up your spine? Would you follow protocol, or would you follow the terrible certainty forming in your blood that the palace itself had been breached from within? 3 hours earlier, the morning had begun like any other. The mist had sat low over the London streets, softening the hard lines of the iron gates and turning the palace windows into pale, watchful eyes. Inside Buckingham Palace, the air carried the faint scent of polished wood, cold stone, and the clean bite of morning that came through when corridor doors opened briefly and shut again. Footsteps were muted here. Voices rarely rose. Even the building seemed trained in restraint. Sergeant Alistair Rowan moved through the North Service corridor with the disciplined posture of a man who had spent nearly 2 decades learning the language of security. He was 42, broad through the shoulders without being bulky, his ceremonial uniform fitting him with the exactness of tradition. The brass of his buttons caught the thin light. His boots sounded measured against marble. His eyes, weathered and steady, had the kind of focus that did not come from youthful confidence, but from years of learning exactly how quickly things could unravel. 18 years in Royal Guard service gave him an unblemished record and a quiet reputation. Not the loud kind, not the sort spoken about for ceremonies or medals, but the kind that travelled in low voices between professionals. Rowan noticed things. Rowan remembered details. Rowan did not miss anomalies. It was not a gift exactly. It was a habit carved into him by training and by incidents that had almost been disasters, the ones the public never knew about. A gate left unlocked for 90 seconds, a visitor badge printed with the wrong font, a staff member entering a corridor 2 minutes outside their authorized window. Small things, tiny fractures, but fractures were how buildings fell. He had learned, too, the most dangerous part of protecting royalty was the temptation to believe the palace was a world unto itself, sealed away from ordinary human threat. Buckingham Palace was a fortress in perception, a symbol that seemed too solid to be shaken. Yet Rowan knew better. He knew symbols were targets. He knew power attracted not only loyalty, but obsession, envy, greed, and the kind of quiet malice that did not announce itself. On that particular morning, he walked his standard route past the loading court access points, nodding to familiar staff and letting his gaze pass over every hinge, every lock, every camera mount. His hand brushed his radio now and then out of reflex, not to use it, but to feel it. Cold plastic, reliable weight,
a tether to the system. The delivery routine at Buckingham Palace was a choreography refined over decades. Vans arrived within narrow windows, were checked against manifests, seals inspected, drivers verified against photo identification, cargo scanned and cleared. Nothing moved freely. Everything left a trace. There were layers upon layers of procedure, and Rowan had trusted those layers because he had helped enforce them, because he had seen them work. Yet even in the calm, he carried an internal conflict he rarely spoke of. He believed in the system, he believed in discipline, but he had also learned that systems were built by human beings, and human beings were fallible. Sometimes they were careless, sometimes they were corrupted, and sometimes, terrifyingly, they were deliberate. The palace didn't run purely on guards. It ran on staff, logistics, maintenance, internal offices that managed the daily machinery of royal life. Those people held keys, codes, access privileges. They were trusted because they had to be trusted. Without them, the palace wouldn't function. Rowan understood that trust could become a blind spot. The first subtle anomaly arrived in the form of a van that appeared 12 minutes early. In most places, that wouldn't mean anything, a minor scheduling shift, a driver who wanted to beat traffic. But in Buckingham Palace, 12 minutes was not an innocent detail. It was a question. It was a ripple in an otherwise still pond. Rowan saw it from across the loading court entrance as he moved through the corridor's archway. A white delivery van sat near the North Service access point, angled slightly wrong, as if it had stopped wherever it pleased, rather than where it had been guided. The morning light made its side panels look almost too clean, too blank. The driver was not visible. The usual bustle of staff receiving goods had not formed around it yet. Rowan slowed without meaning to. He told himself he was simply observing. He told himself he had time, yet his instincts had already shifted, sharpening, picking out what did not fit. The van's rear seal was visible. It should have been intact and bright, unbroken until the inspection point. But even from that distance, Rowan's eyes caught something off. A slight slack in the strip, a twist where there should have been a smooth, taut line. He walked closer, the air feeling colder the nearer he came, as if the mist outside had seeped into this protected space. His gloved hand adjusted at his side. His posture remained controlled. There was no outward panic in him. Training did that. Training buried emotion beneath process. Still, a thought moved quietly through him. This was supposed to be routine. He approached the manifest clipped on the side door, reading it carefully. The handwriting looked slightly different from what he usually saw. Not wrong enough to be obvious, but inconsistent in the way a forged signature could be inconsistent, like a person copying someone else's rhythm without truly knowing it. He checked the date, correct. He checked the listed items, linen, cleaning supplies, routine. He checked the authorizing code. It was there, but something about the placement was odd, as if it had been added later. Rowan's eyes moved to the rear doors. One of them sat a fraction ajar. Not open, not enough to invite casual notice, but not fully sealed. A thin line of shadow cut through where metal should have met metal. The brass handle gleamed faintly. The tactile memory of cold brass under his fingers rose in his mind before he even touched it. He stopped, listened, waited. Then he heard it. Not a clear sound, not a voice, a faint metallic clink, as if something inside had shifted, the sort of noise crates could make, the sort of noise cargo could make, yet it carried a strange deliberateness, like a movement followed by stillness. His heartbeat did not race, it slowed. This was his training response, the one drilled into him after years of drills and scenario exercises. When something felt wrong, when something hinted at threat, his body did not panic. It narrowed, it focused, it conserved. His hand hovered near his radio. He did not touch it yet. Years of training told him to assess before acting, move quietly, observe, gather information. Yet another memory surfaced unbidden. A training drill years ago designed to teach guards how to detect concealed threats. In that drill, hidden inside a vehicle, an actor was told to produce a sound that would make the guard hesitate. A muffled sob, a child's frightened breath, a noise that turned procedure into urgency. He heard none of that now, but the memory still chilled him. He circled the van. The tires were damp, as if it had driven recently through wet streets. That was normal. London was wet more days than not. But the engine heat was wrong. The van had been parked long enough that it should have cooled, yet when he held his gloved hand near the metal, he felt
a folded piece of fabric tucked behind a crate, as if someone had placed it there deliberately, concealed but not removed. Blue and gold trim, the ceremonial cut unmistakable, the kind worn by royal wards during formal events. It was not linen, it was not cargo, it was clothing. Rowan reached in, the air inside the van cool and stale against his skin. His glove brushed cardboard. He shifted a crate slightly, careful not to disturb more than necessary. He pulled the fabric free. The coat unfolded in his hands, heavier than it should have been, damp in places. The inside lining showed tears near the hem. The stitching along the collar carried a distinctive thread, a small customized detail used for royal garments. Rowan's eyes fixed on the embroidered initials tucked discreetly inside the seam. CEDW. Charlotte Elizabeth Diana Windsor. His throat tightened. For a second he could not breathe properly. The coat was torn. Not a simple rip. It was the kind of tear that suggested struggle, fabric caught and pulled hard. There was dirt smeared along one sleeve, as if it had dragged across stone or ground. And there was a faint stain near the cuff, dark against the blue, and unmistakably wrong. Blood. Not much, but enough. Rowan stared at it, as if staring would make it turn into something else. Linen, perhaps, a scrap of cloth, anything but this. But it was this. And with it came the wave of realization. Charlotte was not in the van because someone had taken her out. Someone had brought this coat here and hidden it. Someone had left evidence behind, either through carelessness or arrogance, or perhaps as a message. No one knew. No one suspected. No one could have predicted what happened next. Rowan's hand moved to his radio, then stopped, because even as fear surged, another thought rose colder and more devastating. If the coat was in a delivery van, hidden behind crates, then this was not an outsider breach. Outsiders did not get vans into the loading court without checks. Outsiders did not carry royal garments. Outsiders did not know what could be hidden where. This had to involve someone inside. Something was very, very wrong. He forced his breathing to steady. He did not allow himself to shout. He did not call out for staff, not yet. Panic drew attention, and attention, if the wrong people were listening, could cost the child her life. Rowan did what his training demanded. He documented. He reached for his phone, the secure device issued for reporting and evidence capture. He photographed the coat where it lay in his hands, the torn seam, the stain, the initials. He photographed the van interior, the crates, the manifest clip. He did not touch more than necessary. He did not contaminate. He did not let emotion dictate movement. Then he checked the manifest again, his eyes scanning for anything that would explain why a ceremonial coat might be in a delivery van. The handwriting, the authorization code. He saw it now. A tiny alteration in the code line, one digit overwritten, ink slightly darker, pressure slightly heavier. Someone had changed it after initial printing. Rowan's fingers tightened on the paper. The thin sheet felt suddenly like a weapon. He listened again. Nothing. Only the distant echo of palace activity, muted footsteps, a door closing somewhere down the corridor, the low hum of ventilation.
He closed the van doors carefully, returning them to their near-sealed state. He did not want anyone to know he had opened them, not yet. If this was internal, then the person responsible might be watching, waiting to see who reacted first. He stepped back and looked around the loading court. Staff moved in the distance, unaware. A trolley rolled across stone. A maintenance worker carried tools head down. Life continued because life did not know it was threatened. Rowan moved quickly now, but not frantically. He walked back into the corridor, the marble floor reflecting his boots as he went. The air felt charged. Every portrait on the wall seemed suddenly to watch him. Every camera dome seemed less like protection and more like a question mark. He needed to confirm the coat's identity officially. He needed to check whether Charlotte had been seen that morning. He needed to alert command. Yet he also needed to know whether command could be trusted. What would you do in that moment, when the system itself might be compromised? Rowan went to the nearest secure station along the North Service corridor, a small security alcove where monitors displayed live feeds. The room smelled faintly of electronics and old coffee, the scent of men who spent long hours watching screens. He logged in with his credentials, his fingers moving with practiced efficiency. He pulled up the child protection roster. The royal schedule listed Princess Charlotte in the palace that morning for a brief ceremonial rehearsal, a photo call planned for later in the week. She had been accompanied by a small detail of staff and supervised by a trusted aide. She should have been accounted for. Rowan checked the sign-out log. There was an entry. Princess Charlotte Elizabeth Diana Windsor had been signed out at 9:45, marked as transferred under an internal authorization. Rowan stared. It could not be. The entry looked official. It carried an approval stamp from the Internal Logistics Office, a department that managed movement of goods and internal transfers. But why would a logistics office sign out a child? His mind pushed back. This was absurd. Yet it was on the system. Evidence shock hit him like a physical blow. Rowan stared at the screen, his eyes narrowing, his jaw tightening. It could not be, but it was. Someone with palace authorization had forged the documents. A quiet, chilling certainty settled over him. This was planned. This was executed with knowledge, and someone had ensured the paperwork looked clean. Rowan opened the CCTV feed from the loading court. He watched the timeline, scrubbing back through footage from earlier that morning. The grainy angles showed staff moving, vehicles arriving, guards checking manifests. He found the van entering the outer gate. He watched it pass the checkpoint. He watched it drive into the courtyard area. Then, at 8:15 that morning, the feed stuttered. The image froze for a fraction of a second, then jumped. Rowan frowned. He rewound. The stutter happened again. He advanced frame by frame. The timecode at the bottom corner shifted strangely, as if edited. Then the feed went black. Not for hours, not even for long enough to raise a casual alarm. It went black for 7 minutes. 7 minutes was an eternity in security terms. 7 minutes was enough to move someone from one place to another. 7 minutes was enough to change everything. Rowan's fingers hovered over the keyboard. His breathing sounded loud in the small room. The hum of monitor seemed suddenly a warning. He pulled up access logs for the North Service corridor doors. There was an override recorded at 8:23 that morning, an authorization override logged under a senior clearance. Rowan read the name attached to the clearance. Not yet. He did not let himself absorb it. He focused on pattern, on data, on what could be proven. He built the timeline minute by minute because evidence demanded structure. At 8:05 that morning, the van entered the outer gate, logged as routine supply. At 8:15, the CCTV feed glitched and then blacked out. At 8:23, an authorization override opened access through a corridor normally restricted. Somewhere in that window, Charlotte's last confirmed visual would have occurred. At 9:23 in the morning, Rowan discovered the torn coat inside the van. By 9:45, on paper, Charlotte was marked transferred. Transferred to where? By whom? For what purpose? Rowan's mind worked relentlessly. He knew the palace ran on authorizations and signatures. If someone had manipulated the system, they had access to internal tools. They had to be trusted enough to operate without scrutiny. He pulled the manifest image he had photographed earlier onto his screen. He zoomed in on the altered code. He compared it against known codes for routine supply. The altered digit shifted the classification. It did not just signify linen or cleaning products. It signified internal priority movement, a category that allowed expedited access, fewer inspections, and direct routing. Someone had used the system's own shortcuts. Rowan opened another system, one with restricted access: vehicle tracking. Palace vehicles and authorized delivery vans were required to carry GPS pings while on palace grounds, a silent trace meant for security to reconstruct movement. Rowan entered the van's registration. A ping appeared, not on palace grounds, not in London streets near the palace. It was 3 miles away, at a location that Rowan's stomach tightened. A decommissioned royal maintenance annex, an old facility used years ago for storage and repairs, now mostly abandoned except for occasional work crews, off-grid enough to avoid casual notice, close enough to reach quickly, perfect for hiding someone if one knew the palace's forgotten corners. Rowan sat back for a moment.
No one knew. No one suspected, no one could have predicted what happened next, except perhaps the person who had planned it. Rowan's moral dilemma sharpened into a knife edge. If he followed the order, he would be contained. His findings could be taken, his access could be revoked, the child could be moved, time would be lost. If he disobeyed, he would become the suspect. He would violate protocols that existed for a reason. He would risk career, reputation, perhaps even arrest. And yet, what good was a career if a child died under the shadow of the palace he had sworn to protect? In that split second, Sergeant Alastair Rowan made a choice between protocol and instinct, between following orders and following his conscience. He did not reply to the message. He began copying evidence. He downloaded access logs, saving them onto a secure portable drive kept for incident documentation. He recorded the CCTV blackout timeline, capturing still frames and metadata. He copied the vehicle tracking ping. He photographed the forged sign-out entry on the roster screen, ensuring he had proof. Every second mattered. His hands moved quickly now, but controlled. The room felt smaller, as if walls were closing in. His hearing sharpened. He listened for footsteps outside. There were footsteps. Approaching. Not hurried, not casual, purposeful. Rowan's eyes flicked to the door. The handle remained still, but the sound of boots in the corridor stopped briefly outside, as if someone had paused to listen. His heart thudded once, hard. Then the footsteps moved on. Rowan exhaled slowly, forcing calm. Fear was useful only when disciplined. He pocketed the drive, tucked his phone away, and left the security alcove as if simply continuing his patrol. His posture remained formal, his face remained unreadable. That was the advantage of men like him. They were trained to look the same, whether bored or terrified. As he walked down the corridor, the palace seemed louder, not with noise, but with implication. Every door could hide someone listening. Every staff member could be innocent or complicit. Every smile could conceal betrayal. He turned a corner and saw 2 junior guards approaching from the opposite direction, their expressions neutral but alert. They were not on this route usually.
Rowan felt his instincts flare. He kept walking. One of them glanced at him, then at his radio, as if waiting for instruction. Rowan nodded politely, as if nothing was wrong, and passed them without slowing. His mind counted steps. His mind mapped exits. His mind calculated. By 9:31, everything had changed, though no alarm had sounded, and no siren had yet shattered the palace calm. Rowan reached an exterior access door used for maintenance staff. He swiped his card. The lock clicked. Cold air met his face as he stepped outside briefly into the misty courtyard. The world beyond the palace walls did not know. Traffic moved. Tourists gathered at gates. Life continued because it did not yet understand the danger. Rowan moved across service paths toward the perimeter exit, where authorized personnel vehicles were parked. His own car sat there, unremarkable, a vehicle that blended into London's streets. He unlocked it, slid inside, and sat for one moment with both hands on the steering wheel. His oath echoed in his mind: protect the royal family, protect the innocent, uphold the crown. But the crown was not only tradition and ceremony, it was also a child with frightened eyes and small hands, a child who trusted that the palace walls meant safety. Rowan started the engine. He drove out under the guise of routine movement, using clearance codes that did not yet flag him as absent. He kept his speed controlled. He did not attract attention, yet beneath that outward calm thundered urgency. He glanced into the rearview mirror once and saw a security vehicle turning, as if tracking movement. They were looking for him. He ignored the panic rising and focused on what he had: the GPS coordinates, the evidence, the certainty that time was disappearing. The route led him away from the palace's grandeur into quieter streets, then toward an industrial edge where old maintenance buildings sat like forgotten bones. The air grew colder. The sky remained grey, heavy with a London morning that refused to brighten. He parked a short distance away from the decommissioned Royal Maintenance Annex, choosing a spot where his vehicle would not be obvious. The building ahead was a low structure of brick and corrugated metal, partially hidden behind overgrown hedges and a rusted security fence that long ago had stopped being a serious barrier. He approached on foot, his ceremonial uniform suddenly feeling too visible for this place, too bright a symbol in a grim setting. Yet he could not change. He was who he was, and that identity could be his weapon. As he neared the fence, he saw the van. White panels, same registration, parked behind the building, partially concealed from the road. The rear doors were closed. Rowan's hand went to his radio. He hesitated. If command was compromised, calling in might alert the wrong people, yet going in alone was dangerous. He made another choice. He switched his radio to an emergency direct channel, one used only for immediate threat, a channel that linked to external emergency response rather than internal palace command. He gave a short coded message, minimal detail, enough to trigger a trace, but not enough to reveal full context. He gave location. He gave the word for child in danger. He did not give names. Then he moved. Years of training took over. His footsteps became silent, careful, weight distributed evenly. He scanned windows, listening for movement. The building was quiet, but quiet did not mean empty. He reached a side entrance. The door stood slightly ajar, brass handle dulled with age, the metal cold beneath his fingers. The air inside smelled stale, like dust and rust. He pushed the door open a fraction, peering into darkness. He heard voices. A woman's voice, cold and measured, the kind of voice used to command rather than comfort. And then another sound, small, muffled, a child. That was when he heard something that made his blood run cold. A child's voice, quiet, frightened, trying not to cry. Rowan's jaw clenched. He moved closer, staying in shadow, letting the darkness cloak him. The woman's voice spoke again, low but sharp, threatening without needing to raise volume. She spoke of consequences, of obedience, of what would happen if the child did not comply. The words were chilling, not because they were shouted, but because they were controlled. Then Charlotte's voice came, trembling but steady in places, a brave attempt at strength. She said her family would find her. She said the guards would come. She said the woman would not get away with it. Rowan felt something surge inside him, not only protective instinct, but fury. The palace was meant to be sanctuary, yet here, in a forgotten annex, that sanctuary had become a trap. He edged closer to the door that separated him from the voices. His hand tested the handle. Locked. He listened again. The woman moved, footsteps on concrete, a metallic sound, like a chain or a lock being adjusted. Rowan's mind flashed through options: wait for backup, risk delay, or breach now. 47 seconds later, he acted. He stepped back, drew a breath, and kicked the door with one precise strike, putting the force of his body behind the heel, the way he had been trained countless times. The door exploded inward. "Royal Guard, step away from the child." The room beyond was dim, lit by a single harsh overhead lamp that threw long shadows across stacked equipment and dusty shelves. Charlotte sat on a chair near the far wall, her small frame wrapped in a plain blanket, her eyes wide and wet, but fiercely attentive. Her ceremonial coat was gone, torn away and hidden in the van. The woman stood near her, one hand holding a set of keys, the other high raised, as if she could still command the situation by sheer authority. Her face was composed, but shock flashed in her eyes before it hardened into anger. "You have no authority here, Sergeant," she snapped, as if speaking to a subordinate in a meeting rather than a man who had broken a door to rescue.
The door behind Rowan burst wider as backup arrived, not palace command, but external response drawn by his emergency channel. Officers entered with weapons drawn, voices sharp, instructions clear. The logistics director tried to speak over them, tried to assert her title, tried to turn authority into shield, but authority meant nothing now. Evidence had stripped it away. A child stood trembling in the arms of a royal guard, and the world had shifted. She was arrested on the spot. As officers placed restraints on her wrists, her composure cracked for the first time. Rage surfaced, not loud, but poisonous. She stared at Rowan as if he had personally betrayed her rather than exposed her. Charlotte clung to Rowan's uniform, her fingers gripped the fabric as if it were a lifeline. She looked up at him, her face pale under the harsh light, and whispered, "You came." Rowan's throat tightened. He nodded once. "Always," he said. "That is the oath we take." By mid-afternoon, everything had changed, and the consequences had begun to unfold. Back at the palace, the incident detonated through corridors like an explosive shockwave, though the public still knew nothing. Senior officials convened behind closed doors. Security teams combed through systems. Access logs were frozen. CCTV archives were secured. The palace moved with a new tension, a sense that betrayal had seeped into its foundation. Rowan was not treated as a hero immediately. He was treated as a problem.
He had left post without authorization. He had bypassed internal command. He had engaged external response. He had breached a building. He had violated protocols that existed precisely to prevent chaos. And yet he had saved Princess Charlotte. Charlotte was taken to a secure medical suite, checked for injuries. She had bruises on her wrists, marks from restraint, and a scratch along her cheek. No serious wounds. The blood on the coat had not been hers, not entirely. It had been from a cut on the kidnapper's hand during the struggle. Still, the sight of it had been enough to drive Rowan forward, enough to remind everyone how close this had come to a far worse outcome. In the days that followed, a review board convened. 3 days after the incident, Sergeant Alastair Rowan stood before them in full uniform, spine straight, hands still, face composed. The boardroom smelled faintly of paper and polish, the kind of sterile air used for judgment. Men and women sat behind a long table, their expressions controlled, their questions sharp. They listed his violations. Leaving post without permission, failing to report through internal chain of command, accessing restricted systems without clearance escalation, copying and removing security data, engaging external emergency response without authorization, conducting an unsanctioned pursuit. Each point landed like a weight, not because Rowan regretted them, but because he understood what they meant. Under normal circumstances, this would have ended his career. Under normal circumstances, he would have been dismissed and perhaps prosecuted. But these were not normal circumstances. The chairperson looked at him for a long moment, eyes measuring. Then the tone shifted, not warm, but acknowledging reality. "Sergeant Rowan," the chairperson said slowly, "your actions were highly irregular. Under normal circumstances, this would result in immediate dismissal." Rowan did not flinch. He had expected it. The chairperson continued, "However, these were not normal circumstances. Your instincts, your courage, and your dedication to protecting the royal family likely prevented a national crisis. You are hereby commended for bravery beyond the call of duty." Rowan felt something loosen in his chest, not triumph, but exhaustion and relief. He had not acted for commendation. He had acted because a child was in danger and the system had been compromised. Yet hearing official recognition mattered, because it meant the system had not fully turned against conscience. The logistics director was charged formally with abduction, conspiracy, and the manipulation of palace security infrastructure. Investigators uncovered how she had forged authorizations, cloned access badges, and arranged for CCTV timecodes to be shifted. Her position had given her the power to move through the palace like a ghost, unseen because she was always supposed to be there. Motives emerged in fragments: leverage, control, a plan to extract something through threat. The details remained sealed from public view, but within the palace no one doubted the terrifying truth. This had not been random, it had been deliberate. It had been planned by someone trusted. Following the incident, palace security protocols underwent massive revision. Vehicle authorizations now required biometric verification rather than simple code stamps. CCTV systems were upgraded with tamper alerts that triggered immediate external backups. Emergency signals were routed through multiple independent channels to prevent internal suppression. Access badge cloning detection systems were installed. No single office, not even logistics, could authorize movement of a royal child without layered confirmation from security and family aides. The palace adapted because it had to. Yet beneath policy and procedure, something else had changed. Trust had cracked. The knowledge that an insider could do this lingered like a haunting presence in every corridor. Later that evening, Rowan sat alone in a small office space assigned to him temporarily for debriefs, his uniform jacket folded on a chair. The room was quiet. The palace outside continued its routines, but he felt as if he were listening to a different building now, one with echoes of what could have happened. A knock came to the door. A staff member entered quietly and placed an envelope on the desk. Simple stationery, cream-colored, a small royal crest embossed in the corner. Rowan waited until the staff member left, then opened it with careful fingers. Inside was a handwritten letter. The handwriting was a child's, uneven in places, earnest, trying hard to be neat. "Dear Sergeant Rowan, thank you for finding me. Thank you for keeping your promise. You are my hero. Love, Charlotte." Rowan stared at the words for a long time. His eyes stung, though he would not have admitted it aloud. He had guarded royals at ceremonies, stood at attention during history-making moments, watched crowds cheer and cameras flash, yet this small letter, this simple gratitude, felt heavier than all of it. He folded it carefully and placed it in his pocket. In 18 years of service, he had protected kings, queens, princes and princesses, but he had never felt more proud than in that moment. Because protocol mattered, training mattered, experience mattered, but sometimes you just had to trust your instincts and do what was right, even when it cost everything. What Sergeant Alastair Rowan did not know yet was that this incident was not isolated. Weeks later, in a sealed briefing attended by only the most senior security officials, information surfaced that made the room go cold. In 3 other palaces across Europe, similar disappearances had been reported, not always children taken for long, not always reported publicly, but each case carried haunting similarities. Vehicles arriving early, manifests altered, camera feeds interrupted for minutes at precisely the wrong times, trusted insiders smoothing movement through corridors no outsider could navigate. Patterns did not appear by accident. If this was part of something larger, then Charlotte had not been the only target. She had simply been saved in time. And if insiders were involved, then how deep did it go? Who else had access? Who else had already been compromised? Who else was waiting behind the polished doors of royal tradition, holding keys and secrets and hidden intent? This was not over. This was only the beginning. This story is a work of fiction created for entertainment purposes. It does not depict real events involving the British royal family. Subscribe to Crown Watch for more untold palace stories. What should we investigate next? Comment below.